In the beginning, there were two nations. One was first mighty, magnificent empire, brilliantly organized and culturally unified, which dominated a massive swath of earth. The other was an undeveloped, semi-feudal realm driven by religious factionalism and barely able to feed its illiterate, diseased, and stinking masses. Hi everyone, wish you a very happy Independence Day. On the occasion of Independence Day, I'm going to tell you 5 important books that you must read to understand the freedom movement of India, how India won our freedom struggle against British under the guidance of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi and of course other leading freedom fighters like Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, and of course we have B.R. Ambedkar, we have Rajendra Prasad ji, and there are a host of other freedom fighters. One of the first books in this category is Freedom at Midnight. I've already done a detailed review of this book. This book is not by Indian authors. This is by two famous authors who were very famous for their books on historical narratives, and it's by Larry Collins and Dominique Lapierre. ये इतिहास का एक ऐसा नैरेटिव है जो इंडिया के इतिहास से, इंडिया की आज़ादी से पहले, इस देश की आज़ादी जो 15 अगस्त 1947 को हमें मिली थी अगेंस्ट ब्रिटिश रूल, उसके बारे में जो tumultuous इवेंट्स हुए थे, जो टॉरेंट इवेंट्स हुए थे, जो बहुत सारे, स्पेशली द ईयर ऑफ इंडिपेंडेंस, ये बुक डील करती है कि आज़ादी से पहले कैसे लॉर्ड माउंटबेटन इंडिया में आए थे, हाउ ही हैड एग्जीक्यूटेड द स्मूथ ट्रांसफर ऑफ पावर फ्रॉम ब्रिटिश इंडिया टू इंडियन एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन, एंड ऑफ कोर्स द पार्टीशन एंड वायलेंस, एंड बिफोर दैट व्हाट हैपेंड, I mean it was not as easy as seems, because at the time of partition there were many millions of deaths, millions of migrations that had taken place, but finally we had achieved the freedom. That was because of a prolonged struggle, but it was not something that we can forget so easily. It is to be remembered for ages to come, the kind of sacrifice our forefathers had given under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi. Of course, he had led the freedom movement. The next book is a very interesting book, and this book is Anarchy by William Dalrymple. Now, William Dalrymple, this book is typically not a book on the freedom movement as such, but Anarchy is a book which suggests how the East India Company had taken over the entire nation of India through violence, through treachery, through cunningness, and how from the 16th century onwards they started. They came here as traders. They came as traders, came here as businessmen. They gradually saw how the country is divided, how it is being divided on the basis of rulers, how rulers from different parts, different languages, different religions are controlling this nation. There are divisions between them. They exploited this division with their policy of divide and rule. There were complex power dynamics. They were so smart that they could get into the complex power dynamics and took over the country from being traders to rulers. That was one of the remarkable events of the last few centuries. There is no other parallel of East India Company, and no other parallel of such a large, massive subcontinent coming under British rule. The third in the series is the book Indian Summer by Alex von Tunzelmann. I don't know if I'm spelling the author's name correctly, but she is a British author, and this is one of the most remarkable books. Alex von Tunzelmann has written this book with great deal of in-depth analysis of the events leading to India's freedom struggle. What is important in this book is actually how the book delves deep into the events that had preceded India's freedom struggle. This book has a very interesting first line. The book, I'll come up with a very detailed picture of this book, but this book has a very interesting first line, and you just remember which two nations I'm talking about. In the beginning, there were two nations. One was first mighty, magnificent empire, brilliantly organized and culturally unified, which dominated a massive swath of earth. The other was an undeveloped, semi-feudal realm driven by religious factionalism and barely able to feed its illiterate, deceased, and stinking masses. The first nation was India. The second was England. जो nation vast, magnificent और mighty था, वो था हमारा इंडिया. जो nation undeveloped, semi-feudal, religious factionalism से सफ़र कर रहा था, illiterate and semi-literate masses, that nation was Britain. Yet the British, with the help of industrial revolution, with the help of whatever development at this point of time in this late 16th, 17th century, with the help of navy, with the help of maritime development of technologies, came all the way from Britain to India and took over this mass, this huge geographical mass of subcontinent. And the book also delves into very other interesting aspects like of course other aspects in this book are how once again the narrative is quite similar to as that of the Freedom at Midnight, how Mountbatten came. These books by English authors specifically focus on the role of Mountbatten in smooth transfer of power, because it was one of the bloodless revolutions, and it would not have been possible without a leadership, without a cohesive understanding between the central leadership. And this book also touches upon the complicated and sometimes troublesome and controversial bond between the Lady Mountbatten and Jawaharlal Nehru, but it doesn't make it sensational. But for those days, with those times, maybe things were quite eye-catching, that drew a lot of sensational discussion amongst the masses, India and abroad. And of course, all these books talk about Mahatma Gandhi, who was one of the most, as often said, as the key figure in India's freedom movement, was the most important figures in fact one of the most key figures in the 20th century, in the first half of 20th century, often described one of the greatest Indian to have walked on earth after Gautam Buddha. Many have told it. And all these books mention about Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and there's striking difference between Nehru and Jinnah. Nehru was a secular person, was a person with a vision for the future. Jinnah was more radical. How in fact he, without being a strict religious person, he used religion as a tool to divide the nation divide the subcontinent and create Pakistan out of the subcontinent, out of the Indian subcontinent. So this is another interesting book, by Indian Summer by Alex von Tunzelmann. And into Pakistan. It's typically not a book on the freedom struggle, but this is a book which is about the horrors of partition. This book is by Khushwant Singh. Khushwant Singh, I think many of you must be knowing that he is one of the most established authors of post-independence India. It's a classic novel, and this book is about it's an isolated village in Punjab. Punjab was the state that was caught between the horrors of partition, because millions of people traveled from this side of Punjab to that side, and that side of Punjab to this side. And this book also delves into the abyss of religious and communal violence on the eve of partition. And yet this book has an enduring theme of love, loyalty, and horrors of civil war. What is interesting is that the plot of the book revolves around a tiny village. The village is the name of the village, it's on the border of India and Pakistan, Mano Mazra. And the village was a sleepy village until that day a train from Pakistan arrives, a ghost train with bodies laden in it, and how the entire village descends into violence, into distrust. Yet there are certain people in the village. There is a local goon who rises to the occasion and ultimately sacrifices his life to save people. And the train symbolizes his sacrifice for the village symbolizes the human capacity for love and compassion in the face of hatred. And the last and the most important book in this line is Life of Mahatma Gandhi by Louis Fischer. Life of Mahatma Gandhi by Louis Fischer is one of the most important books, and this book is a biographical narrative about Mahatma Gandhi. We are all aware of Gandhi's autobiography, My Experiments in Truth, but that book was published 2 decades before the independence of India. Now, this book takes many anecdotes, inspirations, and many lines from the Mahatma's book directly. I'll do a separate review of this book, but one has to understand, if you want to understand the freedom movement of India, you have to understand Gandhi and Gandhiji's commitment, Gandhiji's relentless fight. One has to understand that non-violence was the only means which this complex mass of humanity could get freedom from the movement, from the British rule, because violence was not a means. Very simple fact was that there were a handful of British in India. Most of the rule, most of the laws that were implemented, there were Indian in police, there were Indian in army, there were Indian men in administration. Any kind of violence, Indians would have killed Indians. The British ruled India by 2 major means, either directly by employing their own officers or indirectly through Indian kings, Nawabs and local rulers. It was the kings, Nawabs, local rulers who were often more tyrannical in order to get favoritism of the British officers for their own good. They were not afraid of inflicting suffering and pain on the Indian masses. The large mass of Indian subcontinent is poor, illiterate, there were famines, there were lack of food, there were lack of education. In many ways, British, for their own benefit, implemented education system in India, postal system, railways, and not that Indians were treated as slaves, even though they were not treated at all equally with the British. However, the Indians were industrious people under the leadership of great leaders like Mahatma Gandhi. They could realize their own potential, and they could also realize that they could use the same tools, British education, values gained from their education about the entire world. They could use this knowledge and education to fight against the British on liberal and democratic values. So Gandhiji was a very simple man who was born in 1869 in Porbandar. In early days, nobody would have thought that this simple chap would lead one day India, and one day would be called Mahatma by none other than Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore, and for centuries to come would inspire generations of leaders all over the world, starting from Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, even Barack Obama. And unfortunately, many nationalistic movements, many of the aggressive hyper-nationalism these days are forgetting Gandhi's ideals. Remember, Gandhi was always committed to non-violence, and he himself often stressed that non-violence is not a sign of cowardice. Non-violence is never a sign of cowardice. In fact, it's easy to become violent. What is more difficult is to remain non-violent. अहिंसा किसी की कमज़ोरी की निशानी नहीं है. अहिंसा इंसान की ताकत की एक निशान है. हिंसात्मक तो कोई भी हो सकता है. It's easy to get violent, but to remain non-violent, to have your virtues intact even under extreme pressure, is the mark of a man. That is why he wanted a nation to get freedom without losing its soul. That is why, based on those strong foundations, our constitution was framed by B.R. Ambedkar. Under the leadership of B.R. Ambedkar, of course, there were other great leaders at that point of time, like Pandit Nehru, Patel, Rajendra Prasad, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. The name goes on, and all these leaders contributed significantly. And one of the important elements of Gandhi's life was, of course, his simple living. He was one politician from whom the present generation has to understand how to walk the talk. his concept in satyagraha, and his firm belief in non-violence. So all these things ultimately led to understand that when the British would be transferring power to India, the result of the nation would be not plunging into chaos, not landing into anarchy, but the nation would be in safe hands once the British would leave India. Because when the British had come, what was the situation of the country? The country was divided. There was no single geographical entity named India. When the British left India, the British rule can be called an accident, the British rule can be called an evil, but maybe it was a necessary evil, because by the time, one can always say that by the time the British left India, one of the interesting things that happened, that before that, there was never a single piece of subcontinent under one single rule. It was Mountbatten's tactics, or it was Sardar Patel's relentless effort to put the small states or all the different divided zones under one single rule, that gave us a single country that had not been achieved even in 90 years of British Raj, that had not been achieved in 180 years of Mughal Raj, and that had not been achieved even 130 years of Ashoka and Maurya rulers. It was the outcome, or you may say, it was a strangely positive outcome of the British rule that gave us a sense, fighting against the British gave us a sense of nationhood. We came together as Indians, and that is why the country has withstood and has established itself as one of the remarkable democracies of 21st century. So with that, wish you once again a very happy Independence Day. Remember, freedom doesn't come free. We have to remember our duties and responsibilities and uphold our democratic values. Thank you. Take care.